All right, the road to release Out of the Park 25 continues, and right now we're pleased to be joined by Will Bay. Will is a developer with Out of the Park Developments and has been slaving away here over a hot stove to bring you this fantastic game. Will, thank you for sharing some time with me as we count down the days until release for Out of the Park 25.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm looking forward to getting into the nitty-gritty of things here.
Well, that's what people want. They want to hear all about it because this game is coming out March 15th. People are getting those pre-orders in, and those who may be on the fence, I think after talking to you, I think they're going to jump in on this all in. One of the things that everybody's so excited about this year in the Out of the Park community is the ability to get hands-on with developing their player in franchise mode. Can you talk a little bit about the player development lab, what that looks like and how it will run in Out of the Park 25?
Yeah. So like I was saying, I got the go ahead to go into a lot of detail here, so I'm excited. But development for a while in Out of the Park has just been, draft a guy with good personality, hope you have good coaches, and then pray that he develops well, right? So it's kind of always been like a goal to make that better. So with that in mind, we kind of wanted to split it into two parts. There was we wanted to do like a passive development thing where you could have the players, you could kind of control how they would develop over a long period of time, which is something I'm hoping to chat about later. And then we also had something we wanted to do more active. So you could pick a couple players like in particular where you could really actively contribute to their development, which is the development lab itself. And so I suppose I'll talk about the development lab first. Yeah. Basically what it is the idea was to have something kind of like Driveline, right? Or how, a lot of MLB teams have their private facilities where they have all these biometrics, and they have the Rhapsody and the blasts for hitting, and they have all the different tracking data, and you got all the data scientists and trainers and coaches working with these individual guys in the off season to just improve things. And so that was kind of like the idea for it. We want to give teams in the game this type of tool, and so we wanted it such that like you could get like a player like Corbin Burns, right, where you take him and he gets that one terrific pitch, that cutter, and you can just turn him around for your team, right? And then you get an all-star. Obviously, not everyone's going to end up that way, but the way it's set up now is that during the off-season, and then I guess also spring training, you'll have a couple slots in this development lab where you can put different players. I think it's like 6 default right now or something like that, but you can change in the settings. Like everything, you can change the settings in the game. Then you'll send them to the lab, and then you'll have a list of different programs that you can get them to work on. So each program will focus on a different thing, like different parts of their ratings, learning new pitches, improving secondary pitches, that type of thing. And then these different programs, they're kind of like pre-written programs that you'll have like the trainers give out. So they'll have, Monday it's gym, going to the gym. Tuesday it's plyo balls. Wednesday it's band work, something like that, right? And it's over a set period of time for these different programs. So I think in some of the screenshots it showed, there's like learning a new pitch could take 3 or 4 months or whatever, whereas like bunting would take a couple weeks, for example. No offense to bunting. I like a good bunt, but
takes you only 2 weeks and then you master
it. Well, I'll go into that a little bit more, but you don't get that big of a boost, depending. But so you send them to these facilities. They'll go through like initial intake process or whatever for 5 days, so the scouts and the trainers can get a good feel for how the player is going into the lab. And then they'll go through this time in the lab, and by the end of it, they'll finish in like 4 general categories. So the main 2 would just be like they don't succeed, they don't do well, and then the other one is they're successful in what they're trying to do. So if they're successful in like trying to develop their control, for example, on like a 20 to 80 scale, for example, you might see a 5-point increase in their current control or something like that. It varies, of course. There's a ton of factors that go into it. A little bit of randomness. There's current ratings that go into it. There's There's the player's personality, like a bunch of different things go into the boost. But on a 20-day scale with 5-point increments, you'll probably see like a 5-point increment if they're successful in something like control. Just as an example, of course, there's a lot of different programs that do different things. And then if they don't succeed, well, nothing really happens, right? Like, not every player can go into the lab and come out with better control. It just doesn't work like that. If it could, everyone would just get better all the time, but it's not that easy. So there's a failure rate there where nothing really happens. And then there's the two kind of outliers in terms of results where they're very rare, but there's one case where you get like this unicorn type cutter or whatever. It's like they go into the lab and everything just clicks, right? And in that case, maybe you'll see a player get like a really big boost, or maybe, I don't know, maybe they're working on increasing their velocity, but the train also helps them strengthen their arms, so they're less prone to injury, for example. And then there's the other hand of that where it just goes really badly, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have the guy go in and he's trying to work on his ability to avoid strikeouts, and he just gets in the habit of chasing pitches off the plate, right? Just to try to make contact on 2 strikes, and his eye goes down, for example. Or, you got the power swinger who's really trying to work on lifting the ball, and his K rate goes up because he can't get it to click, and he's like overcompensating or something like that, right? And so those are the 4 kind of buckets that the player would fall into when they complete the lab. And the chances of successfully completing it or not, it will vary depending on obviously the program. So ragging on bunting again, I guess it's be much easier to learn how to improve your bunting than it would be to learn how to improve your contact, for example, right? And so there'll be, I think, in some of the screenshots that were already shared, it shows it varying levels of difficulty from very easy to hard, which will also vary the success rate. And then there's like a ton of other factors that go into it, player specific. So you have a good coaching staff, that'll help. If your player has good personality ratings, like they have really good work ethic, that'll really help. If they have really bad work ethic, it'll work against them, that kind of thing. And there's age is a factor, like a bunch of things. If you can think in real life, if it would affect them, it probably does in the game as well.
And that's going to be across, when you talk, Will, about this is not only at the major league level, this is at every level, right? So if you're in A-ball, for example, are those players who are developing, then they are going to be influenced to some extent by the coaching staff that is there at A-ball. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's like a team-wide facility, right? It's like your organization's facility. So like, think about the Blue Jays, they have like the new spring training like complex thing where they sent Manoah, for example, right? You just send the guys that you really want to focus on to this facility, whether he's in A-ball, whether he's in your AAA on your AAA team, whether he's on your major league roster, that kind of thing. You just send them to this facility where they get in this very specialized work. And so what it allows you to do, I suppose, is, I mean, I'm sure you can think of a lot of uses for it, but you have that one crazy good prospect that you want to make sure develops his contact, or you maybe drafted like a three pitch reliever that you give him a little boost in stamina or something. Sure. You could see him landing in a starting rotation, or maybe you drafted the guy with really good stuff and no control, and you want to make sure he can develop some of that control.
I'm sure, Will, how many of these players can get sent to training every year for the player development lab? Is that something that you can set beforehand? Is it everybody or a certain amount within your entire organization?
Yeah, so it's 6 guys.
Okay.
There's 6 slots, right?
Oh, so you were talking before about that was 6 slots for your players that you send. So organizationally speaking, you could send, like you said, a first round pick. You could send a veteran in his mid-20s that you're looking for that extra stamina. You could. It's up to you how many you send. If you don't, is there a default setting where the AI will figure out which players to send that it thinks will be best to send every year?
Yeah, it doesn't do it for you. like it won't automatically do it because it's not like something like the international amateur stuff where it's every month the 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 thing runs. It's because this is just kind of like over the period of the off season. But there is an option where you can just fill it. It'll fill it for you if you don't really want to think about selecting the players yourself. And the AI does a pretty good job. And other AI teams will do this as well. They'll utilize it as well. So, you don't have a huge advantage over them. And speaking of that, like having only 6 slots, which as you were asking about, can be changed in the settings, like all other things. I mean, in fact, the whole thing could be disabled if you hate it, but I hope you don't hate it. I don't hate it. I enjoy it, but yeah, you can change how many, and in terms of balance, with only like six guys going every year, you can target some really specific players that you want to focus on developing, but over the course of like a long-term simulation, given the drawbacks that you'll also experience potentially, it doesn't like throw ratings or anything like that out of whack. It's pretty consistent in that manner. But
is there anything you can budget with this, Will, as far as your team? Because I know there's player development as we knew it before this year, right? Where in Out of the Park 24, 23, and everywhere before that you could budget your scouts, you could budget player development, your farm system. Is there going to be a specific budget for this that will help influence better gains during this training period in the lab?
So there's not something specific for this. There's still the player development budget that you set, which will obviously have an impact on coaching and stuff. So I guess technically there's a little bit of influence through that, but nothing specific for the lab itself. It's kind of an even playing field for most teams in that case. The budgets do affect coaching, which will affect the other thing that I was going to talk about in a sec. But in particular, the development lab, there's nothing budgeted for that.
Okay, you ready to jump on the next thing? Go for it.
Yes, let's do it. So as I was saying, we wanted to make it more of a passive development as well, where you can micromanage each player. And so for every player that you have in your organization or whoever you want, you can now go into like a specific development tab on their player page. And there you can kind of control how you want them to spend their time and how you want them to spend their time with coaches, for example. So you get a guy like great contact, you don't see him beat a power hitter, you can tell him, when you're in the cage, the time that you were going to spend working on your launch angle or whatever, spend that time working on your contact instead. And then over the course of his career, right, if he's spending no time working on power and all his time working on contact, he'll probably develop his contact better, quicker, but at the cost of his power. And then it also works to maintain these players. So you got your major league players where, they come in, day out, going into the batting cage or the bullpen or whatever. And you're just kind of telling them what you want them to focus on a daily basis. And based on this, they'll maintain themselves in a different way. They'll fight aging curves in different ways, that kind of thing. It's kind of it's a way to micromanage how the coaching influence gets applied to the player in different ways. And this can be done to everybody in the organization that you want. So it's basically develop better in this thing at the cost of, taking time out of this thing. Because, you only have a certain amount of time every day. You can't spend it doing everything.
Well, you've been doing so much with this game, and I know so much attention has been given to the player development lab, and now we're diving into the rating sliders as well, and all the things that go into it. There's some other exciting stuff that's coming to Out of the Park 25 as well. And my ears perked up before this interview when you spoke to me about manager history, how you can see if you nailed a trade 10 years later or if you absolutely whiffed it. Tell me more about this.
Yeah, it's I suppose a small thing in comparison, but I was really happy about this feature that we added. It's just that it's a screen that you can go to that has your entire decision history from like trades and signings, and it'll be ranked. So you got a trade you did 10 years ago where you traded, a 1-year rental for a couple prospects. You come back to it now and it'll rank all your trades that you've made by the WAR gained or lost. So the difference. So you trade a guy away for for rental for 1 year. He produces, I don't know, 1 WAR for the team you traded him to, but the 2 prospects you got have combined to give you 10 WAR. So, you came out on top of that trade, and they'll be ranked based on all your trades. And then there's also a part of it will rank all your free agent signings, and it'll also rank all your losses. So you lose guys to waivers, you lose them to Rule 5 drafts, for example. You'll see how much WAR you lost there to the different teams. And it's a really much easier way to kind of check in on how your decisions ended up panning out, I think. And it's kind of fun to run a long-term sim and just see how your decisions worked out.
Well, that in hindsight is 2020, right? But then you start looking at it, you go,
Yeah.
okay, I nailed this trade. I should probably lose my job over this trade. I wonder, does that at all factor in for the front office, for the ownership? Will it be kind of gauging these as well on any sort of point system to figure out if you should still remain as the GM, or maybe it's adios amigo?
I think there's definitely stuff internally that already looks at that. This is mainly a representation for the user itself, where it's taking all this information that we already had in the backend that was already being looked at by like owners and the AI and everything, and just kind of presenting it to the player, because you would love to see that type of thing. And it was hard before. You'd have to click through all the different players that you traded or whatever to see how much you gained or lost from these different things. Is hard to keep track of. So it's kind of just taking something we already had and that the AI and everything was already working with, and just making it visual for the user itself.
All right. There's a lot of trades in real life. I'm already going, oh boy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see.
And you will see, right?
Yeah.
We will absolutely see. Will, anything else you want to spill the beans about? Anything else? Because I know a lot of people, if people are at this point, if you're not sold on Out of Park 25, I don't know what else we have to tell you. But is there anything else we want to spill the beans about it while we have you on the show?
I think we'll leave it at that for now.
We have given the people what they want, and there's a lot to get excited about. Will, thank you so much for your time. I know you're working super hard, and but give yourself a break, because Out of the Park 26 will be here before you know it.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, Will hanging out with us here on the road to release. And remember, those pre-orders are open, 30% off. Get yourself some bonus Perfect Team content as well before the game releases on March 15th. All right, we continue the road to release here. We're counting down the days until Out of the Park 25, and we're giving you a behind-the-scenes look at what to expect for the new edition, the newest edition, the quarter of a century edition of Out of the Park Baseball. And joining us right now is Matt Arnold. He is the Director of Development. Join us on the line. Matt, thanks for coming on. This is great to catch up and talk about Out of the Park Baseball.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk about the game.
Well, let's get into it. Let's get under the hood, so to speak. There's a lot to get to. Your responsibility is basically keep making this game better and better and better. And it's something that this game has managed to do year after year. That's why we keep coming back and buying it. What's the biggest development as the Director of Development that you can tell us about for OOTP 25?
Well, I mean, there's certainly debate, I'm sure, about what the biggest development is. But one of the big pieces, and I think the main focus, I guess, on the chat today, on the call today, we'll get a little technical, but essentially under the cover, we've completely updated, revamped, changed, however you want to call it, the rating system for practically everything. So if anyone has ever dug into the player editors before, looked into really where things were before, we've changed a lot of that in small and big ways, and hopefully it will have an effect of making this just an even better game than it already is.
Yeah, and when you talk about Out of the Park 25, at its core, it is a ratings game. That's kind of how it started, right? Matching data to ratings to then tell the computer, hey, what's a good player and what kind of season this player should have. How do you revamp something without changing what made it so great in the first place?
I mean, that's always part of the issue and part of the trouble. It is a product that's obviously had been out there for a long time. We've had lots of success, and it's not like things were horribly broken or anything like that. But as with everything over time, you discover the limitations in the system that you had before, right? So again, to get into a little of the technical side, up until this point, effectively all of the ratings had a pretty narrow scale that we ended up ranking things on. So it was basically about a 1 to 200 or 1 to 250, depending on kind of how you think of it, scale for everything: power, strikeouts, control, movement. Basically just about everything in the game had that little band to play with. And you know on the surface it's not that bad, but when you consider that you have to deal with, how do you deal with, Babe Ruth and Joe Sewell and Nellie Fox and all of these, great players from all before, versus also dealing with, you know, Judge and Reyes and DeGroms and, every single player in baseball history in between, never mind dealing with all of the minor leaguers, dealing all the way down to rookie ball, to the complex league, the complex leagues, complex setups, the high school, college ball. You dealing with ratings in some other leagues too, and how everything dealing together. It's just, there just wasn't enough space, right? You can't have enough room to space out everybody in that system. So, you know, over the last couple of years, we've started to notice this a little bit. I mean, I think some people have seen like the stuff ratings for pitchers, I think, got updated. I forget if that was 2 years ago or last year. Power ratings for hitters got updated to stretch out the ranges just a little bit more as well. And this year, we basically just said, we can't really keep doing this piecemeal, like one thing at a time. We just kind of said, all right, let's circle back and just do this, all at once. Let's get all of these ratings essentially on the same scale, and use, a little bit bigger of a range to play with here.
So when you talk about the range, you mentioned 250 or 202 to 50, somewhere around there was the range. Are we now talking about 1,000-point range to score everybody? What does that look like?
I mean, it's only 550, so it's not like
Okay.
we're like completely changing the system overall. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, some of it is giving the 550, and it's kind of like a 550 plus, because it's not exactly a strict upper limit anymore. Whereas before, if you tried to go over 250, you would be at 1. So, before we had a very strict limit. Now some of the parts of the top can be a little bit flexible, and some of it as well is more of a, I mean, some of it is more of a logical system. So whereas before, essentially, we always used to set the average at like 100 or 110. I mean, a lot of it was kind of, we set the average at 100, but kind of more like 110, but sometimes 120. But like stuff was kind of like 150, sometimes 160. So it's, it was very sort of murky, and things kind of moved around a lot. Whereas now we've essentially set the sort of major league average, a bit higher in the scales, basically to give us, 3 times or 4 times the amount of room below that. So in more ways than not, we've kind of moved or extrapolated on the bottom end of the scale, and the top end has not changed that much.
So are there any examples, Matt, you can think of? I'm a guy who loves to play historical replays, and I love to just do like 100-year simulations where guys will move through the years and then see. And that's the difficult and fun part about Out of the Park, is that everything changes relative to itself. So you have Babe Ruth, who kind of reinvents the game with power. Then you have the pitching years, and then you have home run records being set in the 1990s. Do you have any examples that come to mind that when you played the game out, when you simulated, and then compared to then and then new simulations with this new system where you're getting more realistic results?
Yeah, so I mean, there's always some case. I mean, the biggest case is figuring out how the outliers work, right? There were some cases in the system before where like Joe Sewell, and I forget the year exactly. I think it's 1933, I want to say, but don't quote me on that. Had like 3 strikeouts and 600 at bats that year, and like the rating system before just like physically could not handle that. Like it was like a hard cap of like you just can't get that few amount of strikeouts. Whereas with the system, and a lot of this too, also to kind of backtrack a little bit on the rating scale. So I mean, yeah, we've expanded out the rating scale and done that, but that's also accompanied a very deep and thorough look into how the ratings play and everything, how they mix together, how they work in the historical game. Let's actually truly dig into a lot of the historical stuff too to really make that come alive and go. So yeah, like it really is those Nelly Fox and some of those guys who just had like you look at their stats and you don't understand how that works. I mean, obviously it's a different game, but like, the players in the modern day strike out, even the guys who don't strike out 10 times, 20 times more than the guys back then did.
So we're talking about ratings. Let's get even more under the hood now. Let's get wild here, Matt. The engine itself. What else is happening for Out of the Park 25 that has got you excited? You think other people are going to get pumped up about?
Yeah, with all the rating stuff too. I mean, a lot of the engine stuff kind of comes alive with the ratings changes too, right? Because anytime you change one part of the system, and certainly the ratings is a pretty fundamental part of the system, you start to take and look and evaluate everything else too, right? So it's we always do it every year, but this is just an extra level of scrutiny of security into how does defense play into the game? How are the pitching strategies working? How is everything playing out? Because part of this too is kind of like whenever you make these changes, you really want to make sure that you haven't broken anything. So you really start digging in and you really start looking at, okay, how is every aspect of the game playing together, right? How is BABIP? How is all of those aspects of it actually impacting the system? How is that? Are we adjusting too much on that? Are we not adjusting enough on it? Is defense changing too many balls? Is defense changing the wrong type of balls? Like, is what is going on under the hood? And basically, we've taken the ratings update as a great excuse to really dig into fully understanding all the nuances of things and just making sure that the overall engine, the overall environment is as good and as solid as we can.
Were there any points? Well, first of all, let me go back. Matt, at what point did you make the decision to kind of make this major revamp instead of kind of like this Band-Aid treatment, if you will, that you're really going to have to go down deep to its core? When did that work start? Has it been months? Has it been years in the making? How far does this go back to this revamp?
I mean, a lot of the underlying parts of it has been in our minds for a few years now. As I mentioned before, like we've done some of the steps of it, right? The power updates, the stuff updates in the last few years, because those parts were were hitting it. And then I guess it kind of, you know, came to a headway last summer, I guess, would have been the sort of final decision of kind of like, we just it's not really going to work how we have it now, right? We were too passive on a lot of ends of the scale. And so, I mean, some of that was also like, we were passive on some of the ends of the scale. Like we just weren't rating players. We weren't using the full scale that we had, never mind it being a small scale. So it was just kind of like, we just gotta kind of, tear it apart and put it back together again and just get this going.
I would say that took the lion's share of your time as far as efforts for Out of the Park 25. What other changes are we looking at? What kind of updates and tweaks are we looking at as it relates to ratings? Because I think it sounds like everything's kind of revolving around that, and then it's going to have a trickle down effect to everything else within the game.
So, I mean, certainly there's lots of other great features, lots of other great pieces, and it's lots of other people on the team are working on other parts of it as well. But I mean, as I said, in terms of the rating, as I said, the main parts really is updating the player scale so that we're really capturing the essence of history, and then along with that is also updating how the historical setup all moves through, and then just making sure that the overall engine, the overall game is as faithful and true as we can be, while also obviously not being too strict on things in a lot of cases too, right? So yeah, so I mean, a lot of it is just trying to focus. We did spend a lot of focus on this, slightly unsexy piece of really making sure that the core game engine is as good as we can make it for everyone, both in history and in the modern game going forward too.
We've been talking about historical changes and how that could work with like a Joe Sewell, for example. We talk about Babe Ruth. How does that look when you're playing the game in modern settings and that you want to take it beyond the year 2024? Anything that's going to be affected by this, or what are you excited about as far as what for the players who take the game into the great beyond? What does that look like for Out of the Park 25?
So I mean, again, kind of along with, as I said, all of this discussion of revamping the scale and looking through the engine, it's really given us a good excuse to take that real true solid deep dive into all the other parts of the game as well that come along with that, right? The whole player creation, player development, how scouting interacts with everything, and all of that stuff. Especially along the player development side, Will's done a lot of fantastic work on a whole new separate feature that I think is getting talked about in another point. But yeah, going forward as well, it is truly making sure that everything looks and feels and plays like baseball, right? We want to make sure that guys are moving through the minors in the right ways, that we're generating the right amount of people and the ratings tiers, that everything is going so that the game can be just stable and nice and playable and fun. So some of it is also making sure that we are being you know stable in how the ratings move over time, so that if you know accidentally check the wrong box in the setting, your league won't necessarily blow up to suddenly having 48 players hit 95 home runs in a season, and stuff like that, right? So it's just trying to make sure that the game continues to play forward and will be a good fun look at how baseball is, and truly when you're playing it out, you just see what the game is like.
How do you play the game? Do you get to play? I mean, when you're doing this, it's kind of mixing business with pleasure. Obviously, you're seeing it from a whole different standpoint. But how do you play the game when you do play out of the park?
It's not as much time as I mean, I came to the company. I played the game for a decade before I ever joined the company. So at some level, I played just more games for fun before I joined than after, since now it's kind of hard to separate, as you said, work from play. But I mean, when I play, I actually generally focus on just kind of taking the modern game and playing it forward. Like, historical is interesting, but you know, usually I just take the Blue Jays and start going and play a few seasons. Play a few seasons forward and see where it takes you. So
Do you have any?
that's my personal style. But certainly,
Yeah.
I don't fault anyone for every other version that they like to do. So
No, I mean that's the thing I think everybody loves about out of the park baseball. When we say it's the infinite baseball sandbox, it truly is. Let me ask you this then: do you have, when you take your team, your franchise into future years, do you have any kind of player that comes to mind that maybe was a fictional character that was created by out of the park and in theory by you in some ways, so it's kind of like your baby? Any players that come to mind, what their name was and what they did in their career?
Out of the park is always the crazy game where sometimes you don't understand the depth that we have. And I mean, the example that I always like most, or there's a couple ones actually, was from a few years ago actually, but I remember I was playing my Blue Jays franchise, playing out. I mean, I was easily, 3, 4, 5 years or whatever into the game, and I like, had my first round pick. It was second overall or third overall or something, and I picked this catcher called Chase Valat, who I'd never heard of, or he picked and he really grew for me, and he grew in. I think he hit 500 home runs for my team over his career. Like he was a rock solid, 130 game famer. I had this massive choice when he was like 36, 37 of like, I wanted to re-sign him, but he wanted like 10 million a year, but he was kind of more of a DH. And then I remember like a month or two after that, I was looking through the MLB draft and like he was like a 25th round pick in that draft. And I was like, no, he was like a fictional player like 4 years into my game. Like it wasn't like, and that's when I realized that it's like, the game has like players rated for 4 years down the road, for multiple years. If there's anyone who's like already in the system, and they're probably already in your game. And I mean, it's unfortunate that in real life, he never developed into anything and, didn't end up playing out. But it's the players like that where it's like you have this great, huge fictional career, and it's like, no, wait, that was an actual person.
And at its core, that's what makes out of the park baseball so great. It makes all this data, these zeros and ones, and it makes it feel organic and real. And we are here for it. We're here with Matt Arnold, Director of Development. You've been here with Out of the Park for the last, I believe, 9 years or so. What kind of developments, pardon the pun, have you seen over these last 9 years to where it is today, especially with MLB licensing, with Perfect Team, and all these other things that have helped grow the brand even beyond where it was when you first started here?
I mean, it's looking at the game over the years, it's crazy where it was back then, and it's crazy where it's come to as well. Both, big things and small, obviously the MLB license and all those licenses has been a big feature, a big update, a big change. I mean, all the stuff with 3D. I mean, when I started, we barely gotten anything going on the basic 3D stuff, and I've worked a lot with Joran on that throughout all the feature work on the 3D side. That's a lot of fun to get to and work on as well. Just to you know watch the little guys truck around the field and throw the ball around, and you know changing the cameras and moving the cameras around. It's frustrating, but it's a lot of fun. So yeah, that side for Perfect Team has obviously been another big change in the game overall as well over the years too.
Well, let's touch on the 3D for a moment, because that to me, it felt like a game changer, because I would always try to explain to people who didn't know what out of the park baseball was. You would try to explain it, and you can show them, and they still wouldn't kind of understand the genius of the game. And one of my favorite things to do is now being able to play out these teams and seasons and individual games, and then be able to see them. And the 3D is, and I know everybody's going to say, well, it's not what you're going to find on a console here in 2024, but it kind of helps with that tapestry, that's this canvas you're trying to create and show people what this simulation looks like when the player actually shoots a ball into the gap, and the center fielder tries to cut it off to prevent a double turning into a triple, or a single from turning into a double. What kind of preview can you give us for 3D? I mean, there's been so many leaps, Matt, over the last few years. Is it difficult to keep on making those leaps, because incrementally you're talking about change and starting from square one, and now where we are now for Out of the Park 24 into 25? What's 3D going to look like for people who enjoy that aspect in 25?
So I mean, to me, the 3D also just gives you that view of things. Like it really changes it from being. I mean, I always hate the term of a spreadsheet game. I mean, it's because it's more than that, right? It's a game. It's still, and you want to play it out and have fun. And to me, as well, playing out the 3D just makes it more fun. And that, and on the 3D side, one of the changes we have coming, it's potentially a little bit of a gimmick thing too, but it's a fun way of visualizing the game. Is Joran added a whole bunch of essentially old timey filters to watch the game with, which is, I mean, it's actually really cool, and a lot of them are just hilarious how they work. But it's like you can actually now basically watch the game like how it looks on like a 1980s TV set, or like a 1950s TV set, or like a 1930s like black and white cinematic, with all the little artifacts moving, the black marks on the screen. I mean, we don't quite have it in like silent film mode where like the screen goes black and the play-by-play text like shows up on the screen. I guess we probably should add that maybe, but and a whole bunch of other like screen filters as well. I mean, admittedly, I don't think those are necessarily something that someone will want to have on like 100% of the time for every time you're playing, but they add a whole new way to look at and watch the game. If you're tired of the crystal clear perfect view of things, watching it in essentially a 1980s RGB TV screen setup is a fun little change, right?
It's, when I first heard about it, that was one of the things that actually got me more excited than just about anything else, because at the end of the day, for me, it's about immersion. You want to feel like whether you were in these years or not, you kind of know of it and what it kind of looked like. So it's one step further, taking you back in time, if you will, what the game looked like when you were watching it on TV, and then how it is now, because we take that for granted too, with high definition and everything else, that you forget what it looked like when Steve Carlton was on the mound in the 70s and 80s, and and what, well, I guess Babe Ruth when he was at the plate in 1927. So the game has changed, and it's nice to see that reflection in the presentation. You talk about
Yeah.
this game that you don't like the term spreadsheet game because visually speaking, it's such a beautiful game. Any other kind of things as far as the game goes that's going to jump out to people that they may not notice, Matt? They may not see right away, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that. But maybe somewhere underlying some other additions to the game that is going to surprise some people when they get out of the Park 25 going.
I mean, this is always where it's. I mean, there's always so much of everything that changes, that gets updated, that it's hard to pick out anything. I mean, there's always little bugs that we fix. There's little annoyances that go on. There's a button here or there. I mean, there's stuff gets moved around, stuff gets changed, stuff gets shifted. We add a new history tab on something, right? Like there's so much stuff that goes on, and I mean, a lot of it. I mean, to be perfectly frank, is like whenever someone like posts on the forums, like, hey, I wish we could have this, or hey, I wish, wouldn't it be cool if this happened? If that catches our eye at just the right time, sometimes that just goes right at the top of the priority list and goes right into getting fixed. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes on and goes into everything that you know it's new all the time. So.
Yeah. We're here with Matt, and we're talking about Out of the Park 25. And one of the things when we talked about when you first came on board 9 years ago to now, one of the big changes, one of the big additions was the MLB license, and to be able to play within that universe without having to rely on a mod community where everything is above the board, where you're able to, as developers, as creators, you're able to actually implement these players, the teams, the brand, their minor leagues, all of it, and that's huge. And I would imagine that there are probably some ways to capitalize on that moving forward as you guys kind of move into that. I don't know if I'm moving out of your scope a little bit, but are there ways that you guys are finding that you can kind of capitalize that on that to make sure that MLB is happy with the product that is represented through you, and that you are able to bring the best game forward possible here in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, there might be starting to step away from some of the stuff that I deal with a little on the day-to-day basis. And I know the team is also working through to build a whole bunch of new licenses and partnerships, with stuff around, because it is one of those things that having the MLB license and a KBO license and stuff like that, just adds extra to it, right? There's having access to the authentic, the official stuff, and to be able to go through those channels. It's nice to have those marks and to have that stuff, and to be able to play the MLB game and go through on the live starts and just go through all of that is just it's a good partnership to have for sure.
Well, we've covered a lot of bases here today, Matt. Is there one more base that you feel like we got to cover here today? What we want people to know about for Out of the Park 25 moving forward?
You obviously have a lot more stuff coming, and all the various other road to releases as we go through. I know. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the exact schedule and all of that stuff is, but I mean, the other part too is, again, I mean, as a team, I feel that we're one of the more open and easy to communicate with teams in a lot of ways, right? So even if there's anything we don't cover on the various road to releases, we'll have some information up on the forums. Where, as I said, we're always reading through, we're always hearing feedback, and I mean, we make the game for the people, for everybody, for you, for the viewer, for the listener, for the whoever, whatever platform you're immersing yourself this on. But so as a safe rating, if there's anything you want, let us know, and we can do our best. I mean, that's when I joined the company, you know, once I got my feet wet into a little bit, my goal was basically to make a game that I couldn't beat anymore. So I don't know if I'm quite there yet, or if I got there many years ago, or if that says more about my baseball skills or my coding skills, whatever way that happens to work. But it's a great game, and it continues to. We just keep making sure that it's as good of a game for however you want to play it going forward.
A lot of people enjoy this game on a different level, different ways to play it. And Matt Arnold is one of the people that is behind the scenes making sure that when you play the game, when you fire it up, that it feels like the real thing and it feels real. And that's what Out of the Park Baseball is all about. Matt, we appreciate your time. I know you're still busy. You work on one thing and another thing pops up. As you said, you're keeping an eye on ideas moving forward. Give me, before I let you go, do you have an idea that you would love to see someday come to fruition in Out of the Park Baseball? And I mean, I know you're the guy who can kind of make it happen, but is there one thing someday you would love to be able to bring to Out of the Park?
I mean, I think I have a task list of 1,000 items and a personal wish list of another 1,000 items, and every time I look at it, even if I go look at it to take one item off the list, two or three more get added on. So I mean, I think I just got to say, keep watch, keep looking, and some of those things will sneak their way in over the course of the year and the years. I mean, we're never stopping to work, and certainly, I mean, there's a lot of things that get added even in May, June, July that are just like, that's just fun to do.
Always getting better. Matt, thank you so much for your time. Cannot wait for Out of the Park 25.
Thank you for having me.